The doors of the Galactic Council Chamber weighed more than a human starship. They were carved from the bones of dead worlds, polished black and etched with the names of 10,000 civilizations that had stood in judgment before this court. When they opened, the sound echoed like thunder across a space so vast that clouds formed near the ceiling. Ambassador James Brennan walked forward into the golden light. Behind him came Admiral Diana Cole and 3 junior diplomats whose names would never be remembered by history. 5 humans. 5 small figures moving down a pathway of black, gloss that stretched nearly 2 miles toward the center of the greatest structure ever built by intelligent life, 700 alien. Delegates watched them approach. Some had too many eyes. Others had none at all. There were beings of living crystal and creatures of pure thought given temporary form. The Velthari delegation floated in tanks of ammonia. The Kryn collective buzzed with the voices of 1,000,000 linked minds. Every species that mattered in the known universe had sent representatives to witness this moment, the moment humanity would learn its place. High, Chancellor Mordevex rose from his throne of living coral. He was ancient even by the standards of his species, a towering insectoid creature with compound eyes that reflected the light of holographic displays. Those displays showed Earth, a small blue world surrounded by the debris of 17 destroyed cities. 40-7 million humans had died in the span of 3 hours. The council called it corrective action. James Brennan stopped at the designated circle, a ring of white light that marked where the accused must stand. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and the weathered face of a man who had spent his life in service to his planet. His daughter had lived in Chicago. His grandchildren had attended school there. Chicago no longer existed. The Terran delegation will hear the judgment of this council, Mordevex announced. His voice was translated through neural implants that every delegate wore, ensuring that all could understand. 72 standard cycles ago, your species was detected expanding into territories claimed by the Galactic Accord. You were warned. You did not comply. The holographic display shifted, showing human colony ships, human exploration vessels, humans spreading across star systems that the Council had marked as their own before humanity discovered fire. As per universal law, the hegemony of worlds was authorized to conduct proportionate response against your homeworld. This council finds that response justified and appropriate. A murmur of approval rippled through the chamber. The hegemony delegation, massive reptilian warriors who had carried out the bombardment, showed their teeth in satisfaction. They had killed 47 million humans and faced no consequences. They never would. Ambassador Brennan, Mordevex continued, you may now present your species' plea for mercy. This council will determine whether humanity will be permitted to continue existing under strict supervision, or whether complete corrective action is required. Complete corrective action. Extinction. The death of every human being in the galaxy. Presented as casually as a traffic fine, James Brennan did not move. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression betraying nothing of the storm inside him. Admiral Cole's hand drifted toward the ceremonial sidearm at her hip. The council had allowed the humans to keep their primitive weapons, considering them no threat. It had not occurred to them that humans might be dangerous for reasons beyond their technology. Ambassador, Mordevex said, a note of impatience entering his translated voice. You will speak. James reached slowly into his coat pocket. Security drones pivoted toward him, weapons charging with a high-pitched whine. The chamber tensed. 700 delegates leaned forward, expecting to witness a desperate attack. A final act of human defiance easily crushed. He withdrew a small crystal and held it up to the light. I did not come to plead, James said. His voice was calm, measured, absolutely controlled. I came to deliver a message. The crystal activated. It broadcast directly into every neural implant in the chamber, overriding security protocols that should have been impossible to breach. The hologram of Earth vanished, replaced by something that made High Chancellor Mordevex freeze in a way his species had not experienced in 10,000 years. Ships, human ships. Thousands of them, hidden in the dark spaces between stars where no species had thought to look. Ships that had been built in secret for 3 decades. Ever since humanity first intercepted transmissions about the Galactic Council and understood exactly what awaited them among the stars. 32 years ago, James said, we learned we were not alone. We learned that a council of alien species controlled the galaxy. And we learned what happened to young civilizations that did not submit. He stepped forward, out of the circle of white light. The security drone screamed warnings. No one fired. You thought you were the hunters. You thought we were just another primitive species to be evaluated, categorized, and called if necessary. You were wrong. The display expanded, showing fleet positions across the galaxy. Human vessels at strategic points near every major council world. Weapons platforms hidden in asteroid fields. Stealth ships monitoring communications. We have been watching you, James continued. Studying you. Learning your weaknesses, your fears, your breaking points. Every species in this chamber has been analyzed. We know how you think. We know what you value. We know exactly how to hurt you. Admiral Cole stepped forward now, her hand no longer near her weapon. She did not need it. The entire chamber could see what was happening on the tactical displays. The human fleet was moving. 47 million of our people died in your corrective action, James said. Men and women. Children and elderly. Families who never knew why death came from the sky. And you sit there, calling it proportionate. Calling it justified. He turned slowly, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled delegates. Many looked away. Some could not meet the eyes of a being they had dismissed as primitive. We did not come to beg for mercy. We came to explain what happens next. Every world that voted for our destruction will burn. Every species that cheered our suffering will learn what suffering truly means. Every official who authorized the attack on Earth will face human justice. The lights in the chamber flickered. Emergency alarms began to wail, a sound that had not been heard in the Council's capital for 800 years. A junior delegate from the monitoring corps screamed a single word that silenced every other voice in the chamber. Contact. The human fleet had dropped out of hyperspace around the Council's homeworld. Not a small strike force. The entire armada. 12,000 warships surrounding a planet that had never known war. High, Chancellor Mordevex's compound eyes reflected the tactical display, showing weapons powering up, targeting systems locking onto defense platforms that had not been activated in centuries. What have you done? He whispered. Admiral Diana Cole smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. We declared war, she said. And unlike you, we do not fight with proportionate response. James Brennan straightened his coat and turned toward the doors. The other human delegates followed, walking calmly through the chaos erupting around them. This session is adjourned, James called over his shoulder. The next time we meet, it will be to accept your surrender. The massive doors began to open. Behind them, the first explosions lit the sky of this Council's capital world. Humanity had come to the stars, and heaven help anyone who stood in their way. The hegemony, homeworld of Kroth Prime, had never known defeat. For 6,000 years, the reptilian warriors who ruled this planet had conquered and enslaved their way across the galaxy. Their fleet was the largest in known space. Their defense platforms could destroy a moon in seconds. Their military doctrine had been studied and feared by every species that valued survival. Admiral Diana Cole stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship, resolute, and watched the planet grow larger on her display. She had studied Kroth Prime for 15 years. She knew every defense grid, every patrol route, every weakness in their supposedly impenetrable fortress. The hegemony had killed 47 million humans. They had destroyed 17 cities in 3 hours and called it justice. Now Diana Cole was going to teach them what justice really meant. "Admiral," her tactical officer reported, "Hegemony fleet is mobilizing. 3,000 warships forming defensive formation around the planet. Expected response time? 47 minutes until full deployment." Diana nodded. The hegemony military operated on precise schedules. They followed doctrine perfectly because it had never failed them. They had never faced an enemy who did not fight by the same rules. "Deploy the drones," she ordered. From the cargo bays of 200 human vessels, millions of small objects launched into space. They were simple machines, barely larger than a human fist, powered by basic chemical batteries. The hegemony sensors detected them immediately and dismissed them as debris. That was their first mistake. The drones spread across the engagement zone in patterns that seemed random but were anything but. They carried no weapons. They carried something far more dangerous. Speakers on every frequency the hegemony military used for communication. A sound began to play. It started quietly, barely audible above the static of space. Then it grew louder, and louder still, screaming. The recorded screams of dying humans from the bombardment of Earth. Children crying for parents who would never come. Families burning in nuclear fire. 47 million voices crying out in agony, broadcast directly into the ears of every hegemony soldier in the system. "What is this?" Warlord Draven demanded from the bridge of his flagship. He was the commander who had ordered the attack on Earth, a decorated hero of 100 campaigns. "Silence those transmissions." His communications officer tried. The drones adapted, switching frequencies faster than the hegemony systems could block them. The screaming continued, filling every ship, every station, every defensive platform with the sound of human suffering. The hegemony had evolved from prey animals on a world of terrible predators. Deep in their genetic memory, buried beneath 6,000 years of conquest, lived the instincts of creatures who had spent millennia being hunted. The screaming triggered those instincts in ways their conscious minds could not control. Gunners abandoned their posts. Soldiers froze at their stations, unable to think clearly through the primal fear flooding their systems. 17% of the hegemony fleet became effectively combat ineffective within the first hour. Diana Cole watched the chaos unfold on her tactical display. This was not how aliens fought wars. This was not how anyone fought wars except humans. "Phase 2, she ordered. The human fleet did not engage the hegemony warships directly. Instead, they targeted the unmanned defense platforms, the automated systems that required no crew and felt no fear. Precision strikes from human vessels destroyed 200 platforms in the first wave, opening gaps in the planetary defense grid. Through those gaps, dropships fell toward Kroth Prime, not invasion forces. Infiltration teams. Small groups of humans in advanced combat armor, trained in zero-gravity warfare and close-quarters combat. They landed on hegemony military installations and began doing something no alien species had attempted in 3,000 years. They boarded enemy ships. The concept of boarding actions had been abandoned by galactic civilization long ago. Space combat was fought at distances measured in thousands of kilometers, with weapons that could crack planets. The idea of soldiers physically entering an enemy vessel and fighting hand-to-hand was considered primitive, wasteful, and absurd. No one had told the humans. Lieutenant Marcus Webb led his team through the corridors of a hegemony destroyer, his rifle raised and ready. The ship's crew had not been trained for this kind of fighting. They were technicians and gunners, specialists who operated from safe distances. When human soldiers appeared in their hallways, they did not know how to respond. The fighting was brutal and short. Human teams secured engine rooms, bridge access points, and weapon systems with ruthless efficiency. They did not destroy the ships they captured. They turned them. Warlord Draven received the report with growing horror. 11 of his vessels had been seized by human boarding parties. Their weapons were now targeting hegemony ships. Their navigation systems had been accessed, downloading the locations of every military installation in the Empire. "This is impossible," he said. "No species fights like this." His aide, trembling beside him, managed to speak through the fear still gripping his mind. "The humans do, Warlord. They have always fought like this. They spent 50,000 years fighting each other on their homeworld. They never stopped developing ways to kill." On the surface of Krath Prime, alarms began to sound. Human infiltration teams had reached the Planetary Defense Control Center. Within hours, the automated systems that protected the hegemony homeworld would be under human control. Admiral Cole opened a communication channel to Warlord Draven. His face appeared on her display, reptilian features twisted with rage and confusion. "Your fleet is broken," she said calmly. "Your defenses are compromised. Your homeworld will be in our hands within 2 days. I am offering you one chance to surrender." "The hegemony does not surrender," Draven snarled. "We have ruled this galaxy for 6,000 years. We will destroy you." 47 million, Diana replied. "That is the number you owe us. I intend to collect." She cut the transmission. Far across the galaxy, on the Council's capital world, negotiations were underway. Ambassador James Brennan sat across from High Chancellor Mordovix, presenting humanity's demands. The dissolution of the hegemony military. Reparations on a scale never before seen. The public trial of every official who had authorized the attack on Earth. "These terms are impossible," Mordovix protested. "The hegemony is one of the founding species of this council. They would never agree." "Then they will cease to exist as a species," James said. "We have 47 million reasons to be thorough." Mordovix's compound eyes shifted, calculating, assessing. "You would commit genocide? Become exactly what you claim to fight against? We would ensure this never happens again. To us or anyone else." A junior aide rushed into the chamber, interrupting the negotiations. He whispered something to Mordovix that made the ancient insectoid go perfectly still. "What is it?" James asked. Mordovix turned his gaze back to the human ambassador. For the first time, there was something in those compound eyes that looked almost like respect. "The hegemony flagship has been captured," he said slowly. "Warlord Draven is in human custody. Your forces are downloading their entire military database." James allowed himself a small smile. Diana had always been efficient. "Now then," he said, "shall we continue discussing terms?" But Mordovix was no longer listening. He was staring at his communication device, at a message that had just arrived from the deepest reaches of space. His mandibles clicked in a pattern that James had learned to recognize as extreme distress. "Chancellor? Is there a problem?" Mordovix looked up, and for the first time since humanity had arrived in the galaxy, James saw genuine fear in an alien's eyes. "The Dravani," Mordovix whispered. "They are moving." James frowned. The Dravani Empire was a mystery, an ancient civilization that had existed before the Council was formed. They had stayed neutral in all conflicts, watching from the shadows. "What does that mean?" Mordovix's reply chilled James to his core. "It means someone far worse than the hegemony has taken an interest in your species. And they do not negotiate." 60 days into the war, the Galactic Council was tearing itself apart. High Chancellor Mordovix had not slept in 2 weeks. The emergency session that began when the humans declared war and never ended. Delegates screamed at each other across the chamber, while holographic displays showed the systematic destruction of the hegemony's outer territories. World after world fell to human forces, not through brute strength, but through tactics no one had ever seen before. The humans were not just winning battles. They were doing something far more terrifying. They were recruiting. Ambassador James Brennan received visitors at all hours now. Species who had been conquered by the hegemony centuries ago. Civilizations that had joined the Council under threat of extinction. Worlds that had watched the powerful crush the weak and wondered if there would ever be another way. The Veln were the first to make contact. They were amphibious beings from a water world, forced into Council membership 500 years ago when the hegemony destroyed their fleet and occupied their colonies. Their representative, a being named Coastal Elder Theron, met James in secret on a neutral station. "We have watched your species," Theron said, his translated voice bubbling with emotion. "We saw what the hegemony did to your world. We expected you to submit as we did. Instead, you rose." "We had no choice," James replied. "Submission was never an option for us." "For us either." "Not anymore." Theron handed James a data crystal containing everything the Veln knew about hegemony fleet movements, defense capabilities, and supply lines. Intelligence gathered over 5 centuries of occupation, waiting for the day someone would finally fight back. "We are not alone," Theron continued. 14 species have contacted us since your war began, all willing to provide information, resources, safe harbor, all waiting to see if humanity can do what no one else has managed. And what is that? Break the chains that have held this galaxy for 6,000 years. Within a week, the number of species secretly supporting humanity had doubled. The Crystal Inquirer provided communications technology that could not be intercepted. The Nomad fleets offered their ships as hidden bases. The Graven Collective, mechanical beings who had been enslaved as labor drones, began sabotaging hegemony infrastructure from within. The Council was fracturing, and nothing Mordevex did could stop it. In the Great Chamber, debates had turned violent. The Silicoid Collective proposed a motion to surrender unconditionally to humanity and offer the hegemony as a sacrifice for peace. The motion failed, but only by 12 votes. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Council's unity was visibly crumbling. James watched from the diplomatic gallery, counting allies and enemies. He was winning the war, but something else was happening. Something that worried him more than any battle. A message arrived on his private channel. No sender identification. No origin point. Just 3 words and coordinates. "We must speak." Against the advice of his security team, James traveled to the coordinates alone. They led to an abandoned station at the edge of civilized space, a place where no ships had docked in centuries. Someone was waiting for him there. The being called itself the Observer. It was Dravani, ancient beyond measure, its form hidden beneath robes that seemed to absorb light. The Dravani Empire had existed before the Council, before the hegemony, before most species in the galaxy had crawled from their oceans. "You have done something remarkable," the Observer said. Its voice was old, tired, carrying the weight of ages. "You have shattered an order that stood for 6,000 years. "We defended ourselves," James replied carefully. "Nothing more. You lie to yourself, Ambassador. What you have done goes far beyond defense. You have inspired revolution, broken alliances, set fire to a galaxy that was at peace. Peace built on the bones of murdered civilizations is not peace." The Observer was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke again, and its words changed everything James thought he knew. "You are not the first species like humanity. Aggressive, adaptive, relentless. We have encountered others throughout our long existence. Do you know what happened to them? James said nothing. He could guess. They were eliminated. Not by the hegemony. Not by the council. By us. The Dravani have spent 50,000 years ensuring that species like yours never rise to threaten the stability of the galaxy. Cold fear spread through James's chest, but he kept his voice steady. And humanity? There was a vote. 8,000 of your years ago, when your kind first showed signs of reaching the stars. The council was assigned to handle you. The hegemony was supposed to conduct corrective action before you developed sufficient technology to resist. The truth hit James like a physical blow. The attack on Earth was not punishment for territorial violations. It was not proportionate response to expansion. It was attempted genocide. Planned for 8,000 years. Approved by the entire galaxy. Why are you telling me this? James demanded. Because you survived. Because you are winning. And because we want to ensure you understand what happens next. The observer moved closer. And James saw something in its ancient eyes that might have been fear. The Dravani Empire has remained neutral in this conflict. We will continue to remain neutral with one condition. When you have finished with the hegemony and the council, you will not come for us. You will not seek revenge for what was planned. And if we refuse, then we will end you. Not the hegemony's clumsy bombardment. Not the council's political games. Complete erasure. Your homeworld reduced to atoms. Your colony sterilized. Every human in the galaxy hunted down and destroyed. We have done it before. We will do it again. James stood in silence, processing the magnitude of what he had learned. His species had been marked for death before they built their first cities. Every achievement of human civilization, every step toward the stars, had been made under a sentence that hung over them like a blade. I will deliver your message to Earth, he finally said. But I have one question. Ask, why are you afraid of us? The observer went still. For the first time in their conversation, it seemed uncertain. Because you should not exist, it replied. The hegemony killed 47 million of your kind. That should have broken you. Instead, it united you. It motivated you. In 3 years, you have rebuilt galactic politics in your image. That kind of resilience is ... unprecedented. James smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Then you understand why we will never accept your terms. We do not kneel. We do not submit. And we never forget. He turned and walked back to his shuttle, leaving the observer alone in the darkness. When he returned to the council capital, James did something that would change the course of galactic history. He broadcast his entire conversation with the Dravani across every communication network in the galaxy. Every species learned the truth. The Council's secret policy of exterminating young civilizations. The lists of species that had been quietly erased. The votes that had condemned billions to death across thousands of years. The reaction was immediate and violent. On 100 worlds, populations rose against their governments. Species that had thought themselves free members of the Council discovered they had been selected for survival only because they were deemed harmless. Others learned that their membership came at the cost of silence about crimes they had witnessed and ignored. Mordedex watched the chaos unfold from his throne, his compound eyes reflecting the fires burning across the galaxy. What have you done? He whispered. James Brennan stood before the High Chancellor, unmoved by the destruction he had unleashed. I gave them the truth, he said. What they do with it is up to them. Outside the chamber windows, ships were gathering. Not hegemony vessels. Not Council security forces. Rebel fleets. Dozens of species united by a common cause. All flying toward the Council capital. And somewhere in the darkness of deep space, the Dravani Elder Council watched and began preparing for a war they had hoped would never come. Admiral Diana. Cole stood alone in the medical bay of the Resolute, staring at the body of Commander Eric Vance. He had been her executive officer for 7 years, her friend for 20. 3 hours ago, he had led a boarding action against a hegemony supply station. He had secured the objective, saved his entire team, and taken a plasma bolt to the chest on his way back to the shuttle. He died smiling. His last words were about his daughters waiting for him on Earth. Diana reached out and closed his eyes. Then she walked to her quarters, sealed the door, and wept for the first time since the war began. The victories kept coming. Human forces had pushed the hegemony back to their core systems. The Council's political structure had collapsed under the weight of revealed secrets. Rebel species now controlled half the galaxy, united under humanity's banner, but the cost was becoming unbearable. The fleet that had begun this war with 800,000 personnel had lost 42,000 dead. Another 70,000 were wounded, many too badly to ever return to duty. Every day brought new casualty reports, new names to add to the memorial lists, new families on Earth receiving messages that would shatter their worlds. Diana had read every single name. She had written letters to every single family. It was the least she could do for those who had given everything. Back on Earth, the population was divided. Millions supported the war, determined to see it through to victory. But millions more demanded peace. They gathered in the ruins of the 17 destroyed cities, holding signs with the names of the dead, asking how many more had to die before enough was enough. Ambassador James Brennan returned home for the first time since leaving for the council chamber. He did not go to the government buildings or the military headquarters. He went to the crater that had been Chicago. The radiation had been cleaned. The debris had been removed. What remained was a vast empty space where 2 million people had lived, worked, and dreamed. His daughter had owned a bakery near the lake. His grandchildren had played in the park every Sunday. Now there was nothing but ghosts. A reporter found him standing at the edge of the crater, looking out at the void. She broadcast his image across the planet without his permission, capturing a private moment of grief for public consumption. "Ambassador Brennan," she called out. 47 million died here and in the other cities. Nearly 50,000 more have died in the war. Was it worth it? James did not answer. He could not answer. The question haunted him every night when he closed his eyes. Had he become the monster he swore to destroy? While Earth grappled with doubt, the hegemony grew desperate. Their empire was collapsing, their fleet was shattered, their allies had abandoned them. But they had one weapon remaining, one option they had sworn never to use. The stellar ignition device. Deep in a heavily defended research facility, hegemony scientists activated the most terrible weapon ever created. It could destabilize a star, causing it to explode in a supernova that would destroy every planet in its system. They had built it centuries ago as a deterrent, a threat so terrible that no enemy would dare push them too far. Humanity had pushed them too far. The device was loaded onto a specially modified warship, protected by what remained of the hegemony fleet. Its destination was Sol, Earth's sun. Within hours of activation, the star would begin its death sequence. Within days, Earth would be consumed by nuclear fire. Diana received the intelligence report with cold dread. Her forces were scattered across the galaxy, pursuing the last remnants of hegemony resistance. There was no time to recall them, no time to mount a conventional defense. She had 12 hours to stop the extinction of humanity. "We need options," she told her remaining staff. "Any options?" Lieutenant Ana Reyes, a young tactical officer who had lost her entire family in the Chicago bombardment, stepped forward. "There might be one way, Admiral, but you will not like it. I have not liked anything about this war. Tell me, The plan was simple and almost certainly suicidal. A small team would infiltrate the hegemony ship carrying the device. They would disable the weapon and transmit its shutdown codes back to the fleet. They would not have time to escape. "I need 12 volunteers," Diana said. "People who understand they will not be seen." Oming back, every member of the crew stepped forward. Every single one. Diana chose carefully. The best infiltrators, the most skilled fighters, the ones who had nothing left to lose. Among them was Lieutenant Reyes, who had spent 2 years training for exactly this kind of mission. "You have family," Diana told her. "I cannot ask you to do this." "My family is dead, Admiral. They died in Chicago. This is exactly what I have been waiting for." The shuttle launched 6 hours before the hegemony ship reached firing range. Communications went dark immediately, preventing any signal that might alert the enemy. The fleet waited in silence, watching tactical displays that showed nothing but empty space. Diana paced the bridge, unable to sit, unable to rest. 12 lives in exchange for 8 billion. The mathematics were simple. The reality was unbearable. Hours passed. The hegemony ship continued on course. No explosions, no sensor contacts. Nothing to indicate whether the mission had succeeded or failed. Then, one by one, the enemy vessel's weapons began powering down. Diana grabbed her command console, hardly daring to breathe. On the tactical display, the stellar ignition device's energy signature flickered, dimmed, and went dark. A single transmission reached the Resolute on a narrow beam that had somehow punched through all the jamming. Lieutenant Reyes's voice, barely audible above static in what sounded like weapons fire. "Device secured. Shutdown codes transmitted. They know we are here. We cannot get out." Diana opened a channel to respond, but Reyes was still speaking. "Tell them how we died, Admiral. Tell them we faced the end standing. Tell them we did not beg. Tell them humans never surrender." The transmission dissolved into the sound of combat. Then silence. Diana Cole made a decision. She ordered the entire fleet forward, pushing engines past every safety limit. They would reach the hegemony ship in 4 hours. Too late to save the infiltration team, but perhaps not too late to recover their bodies. They deserved to come home. 3 hours into the rescue burn, the impossible happened. A new transmission arrived, weak and broken, but unmistakably from the hegemony vessel. "This is Lieutenant Reyes. 4 survivors. We have barricaded the engine room. They cannot get to us, but we cannot hold forever. Requesting extraction if anyone is close enough to reach us." Diana felt tears streaming down her face. "All ships, maximum burn. I do not care if we melt the engines. We are bringing them home." The fleet accelerated beyond anything its designers had ever intended. Ships began reporting hull stress, engine failures, system overloads. None of them slowed down. On Earth, the news spread across every channel. 4 humans were trapped on an enemy ship, and the entire Terran fleet was racing to save them. Billions watched the tactical displays, holding their breath, praying to whatever gods they believed in. The crater in Chicago filled with people, standing in silence, waiting. And somewhere in the depths of space, 4 soldiers held a line that should have been impossible to hold, fighting for time they should not have had, because that was what humans did. They survived. The rescue ships reached the hegemony vessel with 17 minutes to spare. Admiral Diana Cole led the boarding party herself, something her officers protested, and she ignored. She had sent those 12 people on a suicide mission. The least she could do was bring the survivors home with her own hands. They found Lieutenant Ana Reyes and 3 others barricaded in the engine room, surrounded by the bodies of 37 hegemony soldiers who had tried to break through. Reyes had been shot twice and was still standing when the rescue team cut through the door. She refused medical treatment until her team members were evacuated first. "You came," she said to Diana, her voice cracking with exhaustion and pain. "I did not think anyone would come." "We are human," Diana replied, supporting the wounded lieutenant as they moved toward the shuttles. "We do not leave our people behind." The war did not end with a single moment of victory. It ended in stages, like a wounded beast slowly collapsing under the weight of its injuries. The hegemony surrendered, unconditionally, 3 weeks after the stellar ignition device was neutralized. Their remaining fleet was dismantled. Their leadership was arrested and transported to Earth to face justice. Warlord Draven, who had ordered the bombardment that killed 47 million humans, stood trial in the ruins of Chicago. He was found guilty on 412 counts of crimes against humanity. The sentence was life imprisonment in a facility built specifically for him, where he would spend his remaining centuries watching holographic recordings of the people he had murdered. Every face, every name, every story. Some called it cruel. James Brennan called it mercy. The alternative had been execution. The Galactic Council dissolved itself in a ceremony that drew representatives from across the known universe. High Chancellor Mordovex, stripped of his authority, presided over the end of an institution that had controlled galactic politics for 10,000 years. "We failed," he admitted in his final address. "We claimed to bring order and peace. Instead, we enabled tyranny and called it stability. Perhaps it is time for a different approach." In its place rose the Alliance of Free Worlds. 34 species signed the founding charter, including 12 that had been liberated from Council subjugation and 6 that had been secretly helping humanity throughout the war. The Velm, the Crystalline Choir, the Nomad Fleets, the Graven Collective, all took their places at a table where no species held more power than any other. Humanity requested no special status. They asked for one vote among many. One voice in a chorus of civilizations learning to work together instead of dominating each other. James Brennan delivered the opening address at the first assembly of the new alliance. He stood before representatives of species that had been enemies weeks ago, beings who had cheered for humanity's destruction, and now looked to them for leadership. "We did not ask for this war," he said. "We did not want to prove ourselves through violence. But when we were attacked, when we were given no choice between submission and extinction, we chose to fight. Not because we are violent by nature, not because we enjoy destruction, but because some things are worth any price." He paused, looking out at the assembled delegates. Some met his gaze. Others looked away. Freedom is worth any price. Dignity is worth any price. The right to exist without asking permission from those who would judge us unworthy. These are the foundations of what we are building today. An alliance where no species is superior, where no civilization can be marked for death because they are different or dangerous or simply inconvenient. Lieutenant Reyes sat in the audience, her wounds healed but the scars visible on her face. Beside her was Admiral Cole, who had announced her resignation from active duty the day after the rescue. She planned to return to Earth and help rebuild what had been destroyed. "Do you think it will work?" Reyes asked quietly. "This alliance?" Diana watched the delegates taking their seats, former enemies learning to become partners. Species that had tried to kill each other now discussing trade agreements and shared defense. "Not forever," she admitted. "Nothing lasts forever, but long enough to matter. Long enough to prove it is possible." On Earth, the reconstruction continued. The craters where 17 cities had stood were being transformed into memorials, places of remembrance where future generations could learn what had been lost and why. In Chicago, a massive garden grew from the irradiated soil. Each of its 2 million plants representing a life taken. James Brennan visited the memorial before returning to his diplomatic duties. He walked among the flowers, reading the names etched into the pathways, until he found the ones he was looking for. Elizabeth Brennan, his daughter, Michael Brennan, his son-in-law, Sophie and Thomas, his grandchildren. He knelt beside their memorial stone and wept, but when he stood again, he was at peace. They had not died for nothing. Their deaths had awakened something in humanity, had united a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself. From the ashes of their loss, a new future was being built. "I hope you would be proud," he whispered. "I hope you understand." The Alliance Assembly opened with a moment of silence, not just for the 47 million on Earth, but for all the species that had been quietly erased throughout galactic history. Billions of beings who had been murdered simply for existing, whose names were now being recovered from hidden archives and spoken aloud for the first time in centuries. In the silence, humanity took its place among the stars, not as victims, not as conquerors, as equals, but in the depths of Dravani space, far from the celebrations and the peace treaties. Another gathering was taking place. The observer reported to the Elder Council. Beings so ancient that they remembered a time before stars were born. They had watched humanity's rise with growing concern, and now they faced a decision that would shape the future of the galaxy. "The humans have established their alliance," the observer said. 34 species and counting. The hegemony is broken. The council is dissolved. They have rebuilt galactic civilization in their image in less than 4 years. The elders considered this in silence that stretched for hours. And their military capability? The eldest finally asked. Expanding. They are constructing new vessels at a rate we have never seen. Different designs, incorporating technology adapted from every species they have encountered. They learn faster than any civilization we have studied. Another long silence. "We made an error," the eldest admitted at last. "We assumed 47 million dead would break them. Instead, it forged them into something stronger. They have done in 4 years what the hegemony could not accomplish in 6,000. What are your orders?" The eldest turned toward the star maps, toward the growing sphere of human influence spreading across the galaxy. "We wait. We watch. We prepare. The humans believe this war is over. They believe they have won." A sound emerged from the Elder Council, something that might have been laughter if the Dravani were capable of such emotion. They have no idea what is coming. Far across the galaxy, on a newly rebuilt observation platform orbiting Earth, James Brennan stood watching the stars. He was thinking about the Dravani warning, about the threat that still loomed in the darkness. Humanity had won this war, but the ancient empire had not committed its forces. They were waiting for something. He did not know what, but whatever it was, humanity would face it together. They had proven that against the hegemony. They had proven that against the council. And they would prove it again, no matter what emerged from the shadows of deep space, because humanity did not surrender. Humanity endured. And sometimes, when pushed far enough, humanity pushed back. The stars waited, cold and patient, for the next chapter of a story that had only just begun.